The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi there, can everybody hear me? I guess you guys can't answer. What I will do is I'm Max. I am the admin assistant for the Mid-North Network. I'm going to be doing the tech support today. Robyn is going to do the presentation shortly. I would just like to ask quickly, the attachment for the file for the presentation is available in the handout section. You can download that. If possible, if you do want the French handout that will be available shortly after, we are able to email that over to you, but could you put your hand up just so I can see who would like it sent? Perfect. I see some hands there. That means that you guys can hear me. I will ask again at the end of the session in case some people are not here yet, but we will do that. So what we'll do, it is a pretty long presentation, so I will introduce you. This is Robyn, and I will let her do her introduction.
Okay, thanks, Max. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Robyn Ritchie, and I'm going to be doing the webinar this afternoon. The webinar is scheduled to run from now until 3 o'clock. It probably will take that long. There's quite a bit of information. This is the first webinar in a series of 3 webinars that were actually developed for the Mid-North Network last year, in the latter part of last year. This particular webinar is a very basic overview of the 9 essential skills and then the relationship of the essential skills to the Ontario Adult Literacy Curriculum Framework, or the OALCF. The next 2 webinars in the series are going to look at essential skills and assessment, and then essential skills and curriculum development. As Max already mentioned, in case other people are joining us as we get started, all 3 webinars have been translated into French as well. So she will ask again at the end if you would like the French version sent to you to put your hand up. This is available to you right now in the handout section if you want to download it for later. So just before we get started, we did deliver a similar webinar to this one in the spring. We called it Essential Skills, a Fresh Look. So if you participated in that previous webinar in the spring, today's session is going to be a bit of a refresher on that. We will go into some more detail around the essential skills scales and that as well though today. If you do have any questions as we go through, if they can wait, we do have a question section at the very end. But if you have a question that's very pressing, you can put your hand up, and Max will actually try to interrupt me and unmute you so you can ask your question. So if it is pressing and you need to ask it during, go ahead using that mechanism to do it, but if you can wait till the end, then I will do some questions at the end. So with that being said, I'm going to get started.
I'm just going to interrupt you really quick. Sorry,
okay.
Sally does have a question. Let me just unmute her quickly here.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sally. Sally, you've been unmuted if you have a question. Okay. What I will do then is I will mute her again and I will put down her hand. Sally, if you do have a question that you need answered right away, just put it back up and we'll look into that for you, okay? So go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And if you're having trouble with your audio when you ask a question, you can try putting it in the chat box. We'll try to monitor that periodically. So if you're having a problem, Sally, using your audio, you can put your question in the chat box as well. Okay, so we're going to get started. The agenda for today is basically looking at the 9 essential skills. We're going to talk a bit about what complexity is. We're going to look at each essential skill in depth and explain each essential skill. During that section, the slides are really text heavy. I admit that. It's hard to put all of this information in this type of a presentation, but that's why we're giving you a copy of it. So I'm not going to read all of the information necessarily when we get through that section, because we're going to be kind of taking a look at all the different complexity scales that are used across the 9 essential skills, but you will have the hard copy of all of that information. We're going to then take a look at the connection to OALCF. And I think as we go through the talking about each of the essential skills and taking a closer look at the complexity scales, you're going to really see the connection to the OALCF, and you'll see how the research that was used to develop the 9 essential skills really was foundational to the development of the Ontario Adult Literacy Curriculum Foundation. At the very end, I'm going to take you through some general resources that are out there that will help you enhance your understanding of essential skills, and also understand or enhance your understanding of how the OALCF was developed, as well as just some places to get general resources. So that's the overview of what we're going to do today. So the essential skills, the tagline for essential skills that we've been hearing forever is that they are the skills needed for work, learning, and life. So they were developed around that workplace context, but they are transferable skills that cross all different aspects of our world, including learning and life. So they were meant to be foundational skills that were required for people to successfully participate in the Canadian labor market. So they're described as enabling skills, or skills that help people perform tasks that are required by their jobs. They're skills that provide workers with a foundation for learning other skills. So they give people a base. Often they're described as Velcro, the Velcro to which all other skills will stick. They're skills that enhance the ability to adapt to change. So having the foundational essential skills helps you adapt to things as they change and modify, and primarily at work, but also through life. They're skills people use to carry out a wide variety of everyday life and occupational tasks. So again, there's that crossover. It's not just about work, they also apply in real life or everyday life. So again, the tagline that you hear is they're the skills needed for work, learning, and life. They've been around for a while now. They've been around actually since the late 90s, the essential skills. And that's about the time that I started in LBS, which is interesting because that's also, if you've been around as long as I've been around, that's also the time when the late 90s is when we started using something called the validation draft, but that was at the very same time that the essential skills were being researched and put into play. So the 9 essential skills are reading, document use, writing, numeracy, oral communication, working with others, thinking, computer use or digital technology, and continuous learning. All of these skills you'll see in the Ontario Adult Literacy Curriculum Framework, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. You'll see where they cross over or are actually integrated into that framework. So how are the essential skills used? The workplace essential skills are the 9 foundational skills that everyone uses while performing the tasks required for their jobs. They're used in different combinations, in different applications, and in every occupation in some way, shape, or form. They're the foundational skills you rely on when you carry out your work tasks, and they're also meant to be the building blocks that you use when you learn new tasks. So the 9 essential skills are meant to describe the key to acquiring and applying other skills. They're also critical skills in that they help people adapt to change. So for example, change might be implementing a new process, reviewing training effectiveness, or experiencing issues in a workplace that are hard to define. And the essential skills are used to help you move forward as you adapt to those changes and issues in the workplace. The essential skills have actually quite a long history in their development. So initially, we had something called the Canadian Classification and Dictionary of Occupations that was developed in Canada, and that was developed over the course of many years and used between 1971 and 1993. And that dictionary later became the National Occupation Classification. So the NOC, which we still use today, a variation of that, replaced that classification in 1993. We still talk about, we have to know the NOC codes when we're in literacy and basic skills, when we're actually entering employment, for example, into somebody's record on EOIS CAMS. So most people are probably familiar with the National Occupational Classification. In 1993, so the NOC replaces the dictionary, and at the same time, the government launches what they called the Essential Skills Research Project. And that project was launched between 1993 and 1994. And between 1995 and 1997, a number of pilots and data collection happened across the country, and that information was used to develop the essential skills profiles. In 1998, the writing of the profiles commenced. So the first step of the Essential Skills Research Project was to draft the framework that included the list of 9 essential skills, the complexity rating scales, and the approach to data collection for the profiles. The point or purpose of the Essential Skills Research Project was to support curriculum development and training for the current occupations that were actually identified in that National Occupation Classification, or the NOC code. Arthur D.W. Smith is somebody who in the 70s did a lot of work around identifying generic skills for occupational training, and that body of work was used as the starting point for the Essential Skills Research Project. They also did a worldwide literature review, and there was integration with the International Adult Literacy Survey. So as I mentioned a couple minutes ago, 1998 was also the time when literacy and basic skills started using something called the validation draft, also fondly known as the matrix. And that was a very skills-based framework that was used in LBS for all the years up to the rollout of the Ontario Adult Literacy Curriculum Framework. What's interesting about that is way back then in 1998, again, if you've been around as long as I have, Harold Alden was kind of the head of LBS, or the main ministry guy with LBS. And he told me in 1998 that I should be looking at that essential skills research because it was going to be very important for literacy and basic skills in the years to come. I just think that's interesting because he definitely was on the ball with that, because the essential skills research project and the profiles and the complexity scales that were developed through that definitely were very integral in the research that was done as the Ontario Adult Literacy Curriculum Framework was developed. So the Essential Skills Research Project, the point of it was to improve economic performance and labor market outcomes by encouraging more training. So it was to give a framework to help promote occupational training. So the project was going to answer the question, training for what? It was a national research study. It was launched in 1993, and it was meant to identify those essential skills needed for work, learning, and life. So the skills that were identified back then are still the skills that are in they're still the key 9 essential skills. Over time, some of the scales have changed or dropped off, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we're looking at each of the 9 essential skills in depth. But essentially, that body of research is still what is being used today. it answered how an individual knows if they have the skills needed for the job they want. So it was actually developed by conducting interviews all across Canada with people in 180 different occupations. And it was meant to develop ways to talk about essential skills by drawing on the interviews and adapting the scales that were initially developed in the International Adult Literacy Survey and the Canadian Language Benchmarks. So there's connections between all of these scales. They're very complicated, but each body of work built on or drew from a body of work that was already completed. So just to give you an overview of some of the key points around the essential skills, literacy skill levels are linked to occupations and industries, and different occupations have different literacy demands. Literacy impacts economic life chances and opportunities, and training to increase literacy skills supports those most at risk during those economic transitions. Why? Because when the economy takes a downturn and people lose their jobs, they need to have those transferable skills, those foundational skills, to be able to learn new skills or apply and transfer those skills to new jobs. In the Great Recession of 2008, we saw that happen in many different parts of Ontario, where people who had had jobs for 20 plus years, they did the same job, they were good at their job, they made good money, they lost their jobs, and they didn't have those transferable skills to be able to make the leap to something different. And there was a lot of work in literacy at that time around supporting those people and helping them obtain those occupational skills, and essential skills research was really foundational to that. Educational attainment does not guarantee literacy proficiency. So I think this is really a key. It doesn't matter what education you have. It doesn't necessarily mean you are proficient and have great skills. I think if you work in LBS, you see this every day. And that is one of the reasons why we exist, and one of the key things we do is fill those skill gaps that people have. So using complexity ratings to describe occupational requirements makes sense, given that educational attainment is not always a reliable measure of ability. So the essential skills give you another vehicle to determine whether or not people have the skills they need, because those essential skills and the complexity levels are matched up to actual occupations. And literacy is a continuum. So a person isn't literate or illiterate. Literacy is a continuous distribution of abilities that depends on the type of information and the complexity of tasks presented. Furthermore, literacy skills work on the use it or lose it principle. So again, I think this is something that anybody who works in the literacy and basic skills field, that really hits home with people. People do lose their skills over time. I think of math upgrading, and you know, if I'm filling in for an instructor for the day, which I often do, and I have to do math, I've lost my math in a lot of ways because I don't use it all the time. So I think that that's a reality that we deal with. So we're going to talk now about complexity. Complexity is key in the essential skills scales. So we measure proficiency in each essential skill with a specific complexity rating. The ratings were developed to identify the difference in skill requirements among occupations and the underlying constructs applicable to learning strategies. And we'll talk a lot about this as we move through each of the essential skills. So the complexity ratings consider different dimensions of the skill on either 4 or 5 point scales, generally, integrating information into a single number to provide an overall rating. So as we start talking about this, sometimes a particular task might have a rating in a different dimension of a different rating, but what the essential skills profile do is they integrate the information and give you a single number to give you an overall rating. It's, again, there's a lot of information and support in the complexity scales, but it's obviously never going to be an exact science. So complexity levels from 1, which are typically pretty basic tasks, to a 4 or 5, which are advanced tasks, are then assigned to example tasks performed by a worker in a specific job. So a lot of the information in the essential skills profiles that you're reading are examples. They give you an example task that somebody would do in a specific job. Obviously, a profile is not going to give you every single task that somebody would perform in every single job. That's just not feasible, but it gives you a general understanding of the requirements of a particular job. So this just gives you a snapshot of general complexity and essential skills. So generally speaking, at level 1, somebody is locating and using information. So as an example, a pet groomer might read items in a supply catalog or a purchasing flyer. At level 2, you're locating and cycling information. So kitchen helpers might read precautions relating to fire hazards in the kitchen. By level 3, you're not just locating and cycling, but you're also integrating that information. So this example, branch managers may refer to several human resource manuals to locate and integrate information on a topic like a pay scale or a job description. At level 4, you usually have to apply some prior knowledge to the situation. So this example, court clerks select information from various acts to assist a justice of the peace in cases where a clarity around jurisprudence is required. So the acts contain complex legal terminology, which is the prior knowledge that they need to have to be able to understand that. And then at level 5, you're applying prior knowledge, you're locating, you're cycling, you're integrating, and you're often generating something. So assistant business managers and labor unions read adjudication decisions that have established jurisprudence for pending grievances, which then go to adjudication. This legal wording has specific and complex implications for specific cases. So the complexity builds on each level. Each level is more complex, and there's usually something additional that someone has to do in order to complete that task. This is, again, a general kind of snapshot of what complexity and essential skills looks like. Complexity, there's just a note at the bottom of the slide, just to be aware, complexity in numeracy doesn't follow this structure. Numeracy is a little different. It's based on operations required and the interpretation of the concept. And we're actually going to walk through each of the essential skills and take a look at the complexity scales so that you get a better sense of what's included in each scale. Now, the general complexity in essential skills, if you look at the description of the International Adult Literacy levels, so the IELTS levels, you'll see where they took this research and actually used it to start building the complexity skills and essential skills. So at level 1, you're locating information. At level 2, you're cycling. At level 3, you're integrating. 4, you're integrating, synthesizing, and using prior knowledge. And at level 5, you're generating. So you can definitely see how this research formed the basis for the general complexity scale in the essential skills research project. I'm not going to read through all of these examples. I'm sure many of you have seen this before. What I will point out now, and we'll talk about again, is the fact that the OALCF was developed to only cover the first 3 levels of essential skills. So the concept was that that was the focus of the Literacy and Basic Skills program, was to cover up to the end of level 3. The general idea is that if people have skills at level 3, the end of level 3, they generally have the ability to function fairly well in society and at certain levels of jobs. So that's the focus of the program, and that's an important distinction. And it's important to know why it stopped at level 3, and that was because that is the focus of the literacy program in Ontario. This is the deck of cards example. I've had different people explain complexity to me using this example. So I thought if you haven't ever seen this or heard this before, it really helps cement the concept of how the complexity builds. So if you're looking at a deck of cards and you're using a deck of cards, at level 1, you might have to, in that deck of cards, locate an ace. So you're told find the ace. So you have 52 cards, you have to find the ace. At level 2, you have to find all the aces in the deck. So to find the cards, you have to locate the first one, and then you have to cycle back through the deck to find all the others. And that's where that next step, or building on the complexity, comes in. At level 3, if you're asked to find all the spades and put them in order from lowest to highest, you would have to cycle through the deck to find all the spades, put them in order, and then decide if the ace is the highest or lowest card. At level 4, you need to think of 3 different card games and show the winning hand for each game. So you have to cycle through to locate all the cards you need. You have to rely on previous knowledge of card games and integrate the knowledge to show the winning hands. So again, you're building on, and you need that prior knowledge piece. At level 5, you might be creating a completely original card game. So you have to do all of the things you did in the first 4 levels, but you have to then use this information to generate something new. So it's kind of a clever way of explaining complexity, and giving, just to help really understand how it builds on each level builds on the next. Okay, just checking in to make sure there isn't anything in the chat. So I'm going to actually walk through the 9 different essential skills now and talk a little bit about them and what they include, and take a look at the complexity scales that form the basis for each of these 9 essential skills. So the first, and I always, it seems to be the most common, is reading text. As we go through this, you're going to start to really see how the OALCF drew on the complexity scales. So reading text is typically refers to reading material that is in the form of sentences or paragraphs. It involves reading notes, letters, memos, manuals, specifications, regulations, reports, journals. Wide variety of material that is involved in reading text. Sorry, just it's important to note that reading does include forms and labels if they have at least a paragraph of text in them. It includes print and non-print material, so it can include text on computer screens or tablets. And it also can include text that's at least a paragraph in length if it's in a chart, table, or graph. So a particular example of something that someone is reading might not neatly fit or align with only one essential skill. And in fact, often it doesn't, and it crosses over between different, or there are different essential skills that come into play. In reading, some of the typical applications you might have are scanning for information or overall meaning, reading to understand, learn, critique, or evaluate, or analyze and synthesize information from different sources, from complex and lengthy text. If you think to the language of the OALCF, the curriculum framework, you'll see that the language is similar. A lot of the language is pulled out of the essential skills scales right into the curriculum framework. Some examples, and for each of these, we have a workplace example and a community example. Again, keeping in mind that although the research focused on the workplace and on occupations in the workplace, the idea is that these skills are also transferable to life and learning. So for workplace, an airline sales agent reads a notice on a computer screen, such as a special handling requirements or weather information. So although it's on a computer screen, it's digital because it's more than a paragraph in length, it is going to count as a reading. It will be part of the reading essential skill. In the community, you might use this skill to understand a lease agreement for a new apartment. When you look at the and later on I'll show you where to find more information, but when you read through all the information that Human Resources Development Canada has on essential skills, they have loads and loads of examples for each of the essential skills. When you look at the complexity of reading text, it's based on, there are 5 levels of complexity. So as I said earlier, typically each essential skill is based on either 4 or 5 levels of complexity. It varies from skill to skill. And it is also based on 2 different areas or dimensions, types of text and purpose for reading. So at level 1, you're reading short text and you're locating information, or you're following simple written directions. At level 2, the texts become more complex and you're usually locating or cycling through to find more pieces of information. You also might be making low-level inferences. So you'll see the type of text and then the purpose for reading are both captured in the complexity scale. Level 3, you're choosing and integrating information from various sources or from various parts of a text. And again, making inferences, identifying relevant and irrelevant information. Once again, in LBS, level 3 is where we kind of, our framework ends. That doesn't necessarily mean that we aren't delivering or working, helping people develop their skills beyond level 3, because that's just not the reality of what happens. But the framework itself that we use in LBS is meant to align with the end of level 3. Level 4, we're integrating and synthesizing information from many sources, from complex or lengthy texts. And this is where you're starting to use that background knowledge and maybe do some evaluation on the quality of the text. And finally, at level 5, you're interpreting dense and complex texts and making high-level inferences. And also that's where the specialized knowledge comes into place. So again, the 5 levels of text reading complexity scale are compatible with those that are used in the International Adult Literacy Survey, except in IELTS level 4 has actually been broken down into 4 and 5. So it's just important to know that this built on IELTS, and again, we'll make the connection to OALCF. The examples and these illustrative examples you find when you're looking at the essential skills profiles online, and the information online, they give you examples to help you really understand what somebody might do at each of those levels. And the examples are grounded in real occupational tasks. So at level 1, you might be scanning a memo to find a meeting location. At level 2, somebody might be making recipes for drinks from a variety of guides, so they have to cycle through them. Level 3, painter might be using a manual on sandblasting to gain information on how to deal with surfaces with differing hardness and porosity. So again, the complexity builds up to level 5, where you might have a materials testing manager reading specifications that are long, interpreting applications, and using or making high-level inferences to decide how to use that information in a specific case. So that's reading in a snapshot and gives you a sense of the levels. And as we go through this, again, you can probably see the language was very heavily drawn on, and the research was drawn on to actually build the scales that comprise or form the curriculum framework.
Sorry, Robyn, we have someone with a hand
no
up. Perfect.
Yep, go ahead.
Go ahead, Klaus.
Sorry, I have no question.
Oh, you had your
Oh,
hand
no
up.
problem.
All right. Perfect.
That's okay. I needed a drink of water, so that was perfect timing.
Well, maybe yes. Okay.
Do you have a question?
Yes, with all the template you come up with, is it possible to have it in French?
Actually, yes. We mentioned at the beginning that all the webinar this is a 3 webinar series. They've all been translated into French. So if you let Max know, she'll give you an opportunity again at the end of the webinar. They will send you the French translated version as well. The handout, the English version is in the handout section right now. You can download that, but the French will be made available to those who want to have it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I'm going to, if nobody else has anything, I'm going to continue on with document use. So document use refers to tasks that involve information that's displayed where you can have words, numbers, icons, and other visual characteristics like lines, colors, and shapes that are given meaning by their spatial arrangement. So that's kind of the complex description of what a document would be. So there's tons of different examples: graphs, lists, tables, blueprints, drawings, signs, and labels are all different types of documents used in the world of work. If a document also includes a paragraph of text, such as a label on a completed form, it can also cross over or be part of reading text. Likewise, documents that require the entry of words, phrases, sentences, and paragraphs, so something that you write on, are also included in writing, in the writing essential skill, which we'll talk about after. So document can be print and non-print. Again, computer screen, microfiche is an example. I don't know the last time I looked at microfiche, but it's still available. Gauges, clocks, flags. So it really covers a wide variety of things. So often with document use in particular, very rarely are you just using a document. You're usually reading a document as well, because there's often more than a paragraph of text on it, or you're writing, completing, or producing a document. So it really covers quite a bit. And when you're doing a task, you're usually using more than one essential skill to complete that task. So for example, completing a form, checking off items on a list of tasks, and entering information on activity schedules. Those are all examples of things where you're using a document, but you're also writing or in many cases reading. So again, typical applications would be reading signs, labels, lists, understanding information on graphs or charts, entering information on forms, creating or completing tables, reading drawings. Document use is really huge in our world today. I often, if I'm doing this live, I will have people think about all the things they do in a day and how that fits into how it's either an OALCF task or an essential skills task. And one of the things that we encounter a lot is our documents, because documents are really everywhere. You can, an example referring to a bus schedule as the community example, but there's a million times a day that you encounter a document. There's signs, there's directories, there's all sorts of places. Every time you open a computer screen, there's usually, it's a document that you're dealing with. Workplace example, a bricklayer interpreting blueprints to determine height, length, and thickness of walls. Other examples, postal clerks reading addresses on mailing labels, cashiers looking at work schedules, entering times in a schedule where you start and complete your shift if it's not done automatically. So there's a million different ways that we interact with documents every day. Document use complexity is, again, a 5-level scale, and it's based on 3 dimensions of the document itself. So the dimensions are the complexity of the document. So that covers both the structure of it, the number of documents, document type, the complexity of finding or entering information on that document. So how hard it is to find the information you need on a document or enter the information you need to enter on a document. And of course, the complexity of the information use. So what do you need to have as far as prior knowledge and content knowledge and thinking processes to be able to actually use that document? So each level of the scale is defined with reference to all 3 of those dimensions. Tasks that are more difficult on one dimension of the complexity rating scale may be more or less difficult on the others, as the 3 dimensions function a little bit independently. But the complexity rating assigned to the task is usually the best summary description of its level at that complexity. So the levels, again, with document use, this particular complexity scale, are compatible with those in the IELTS scale. So that's important. Again, it's using that research, body of research. So just to illustrate document use examples by level, somebody at level 1 might be just identifying WMIS icons. At level 2, somebody might be reading work schedules and assignment sheets to determine where they have to work and what they have to do when they go there. Something a little more complex at level 3, an assistant to an optometrist might use a diagram to identify angles for inserting and removing a contact. At level 4, you might be looking at blueprints and plans that help you understand in a golf course where the drainage and irrigation need to take place. And at level 5, you might be doing something far more complex, like inspecting highway sites, reading blueprints, manuals, understanding explosives, regulations, and layouts for blasting on a highway site. So again, the 3 dimensions are built into that. The 3 different dimensions of the document, and then a level will be chosen based on overall what that rating will be. So document use is fairly complex as far as understanding the complexity, because you really do have to look at all 3 of those dimensions together to make a determination of what level a particular task would fall under. With writing, you're communicating by arranging words, numbers, and symbols on paper, or more often than not on a computer screen these days. So writing includes writing text and writing in documents. So for example, filling in forms, and non-paper based writing like on a computer. Your general or most typical applications for writing are writing to organize, record information, writing to inform or persuade people, writing to request information, or writing an analysis or a comparison. So those are pretty typical applications. In the community, you might use the skill to complete an application for a credit card. While you're writing, you're also using a document at the same time. In the workplace, a human resource professional might write a recommendation on something like workplace health and safety. Again, that's more what you think of typically as writing, but you are writing all the time, even if you're using a document. Nurses' aides might write entries about patient care and medical files. Computer salespeople might write letters to clients about hardware and software recommendations. Small business owners or nonprofit organizations might write detailed proposals to obtain funding from different sources. So there are many, many different ways that we use writing in the workplace, and of course we use it in life and learning as well. So with writing, you have 5 levels, again, similar to both reading and document use, and you have 3 different dimensions. So your dimensions are length and purpose for the writing. So how long is it and why are you writing it? The style and structure, is it informal writing or is it more formal writing? Does it have a format? Doesn't it have a format? And then the content of the writing, is it concrete? Are you writing about things that you know about that are day-to-day matters? Or are you creating new content? So from one end of the scale to the other. And I think that when we get to look at the OALCF, you'll see that again, you see these dimensions definitely built into the curriculum framework. And again, I just want to remind you that you're getting a copy of this. So I'm not going to read through all of these complexity scales. That would take us hours and hours. You have them to download and look at. They're accessible online as well. But what I'm just trying to do is break it down into small chunks by essential skills, so you get a really good sense of how complexity builds across the 5 levels. Again, reminder, in the OALCF, we're looking at up to the end of level 3 typically. And that is what the scale is, or the framework is based on. So writing examples by level, those real life examples, a courier might write a short note at level 1 to themselves. At level 2, somebody might write, a computer salesperson might write a short letter to customers about, with a quote about hardware or software. At level 3, a police officer might prepare information for a search warrant. At level 4, a bylaw enforcement officer might write options and recommendations for a proposed bylaw change. And at level 5, a special events coordinator might create marketing materials, so they're generating something new, scripts and feature articles to promote public awareness and participation. So again, you can still see the connection to the International Adult Literacy Survey 5 levels, even through the writing complexity levels. Okay, so that was reading, document use, and writing. And now we're going to kind of flip to numeracy. And numeracy is a little different. So numeracy is about using numbers and thinking in quantitative terms to complete tasks. So in numeracy, there are 4 settings, and they suspiciously look exactly like the 4 different groups that we have in the OALCF. So money math deals with financial transactions such as handling cash, preparing bills, or making payments. Scheduling or budgeting and accounting looks at managing time and money as resources, planning and monitoring their use, assessing best value, and reducing waste. So, and just as a note, the difference between handling money and carrying out accounting tasks is not always that clear. The definition of money math indicates the need for some type of a transaction to take place. With measurement and calculation, you're measuring and describing the physical world. And finally, with data analysis, you're looking at the analysis of numerical data, such as extrapolation of information and determination of trends, or statistically significant things that you see in the data. So again, the applications are making, and they sound like the dimensions, making calculations, taking measurements, performing scheduling, budgeting or accounting activities, analyzing data, and then making estimations. So that is another area that is captured within numeracy. In the community, you might use the skill to calculate deductions on a personal tax form. In the workplace, a payroll clerk might monitor vacation entitlements to prepare budget and scheduling forecasts. Other workplace examples might be a bartender calculating bills and making change. Child caregivers measuring cooking ingredients when they're required to double or halve a recipe, or flight engineers analyzing engine problem data for signs of problems. So their numeracy is used in almost all occupations, and the complexity varies depending on the task itself. There are two different complexity scales in numeracy, the calculation and then the estimation. So, and this is where it gets really complex. Within calculation, you have two different dimensions across 5 levels of complexity. So they include the operations required and translation. Operations required refers to the actual math operation used, like addition or division. It covers the number of different operations used, the number of steps of calculation, and the difficulty of the operations that are used. Translation is the turning of the problem into a set of operations so the math can be applied to determine the answer. So an example would be if a waiter adding up a bill does not have to do much translation, or a waiter adding up a bill doesn't have to do too much translation to set up the problem. On the other hand, a roofer might use more translation to determine how many packages of shingles are needed to cover an irregularly shaped roof by restating the problem as a set of mathematical operations. The roofer has to think through and set up the problem before doing those operations. So that's that translation piece. It's a little hard to explain. Translation is also about the obviousness or the transparency of the problem, and then the setup of whatever you need to do to solve it. So in the Adult Literacy and Life Skills Survey, this dimension was actually called Problem Transparency / Type of Match, which was in recognition of the literacy skill, which is often required to identify values in prose and documents. So it's complex to kind of explain translation, but again, it is rated across those 5 levels of complexity. With estimation, again, it has 5 different dimensions across 4 levels of complexity. So this is where math is quite complicated. So those 5 dimensions include whether there's a set procedure, the number of factors comprising the item being estimated, the amount of information you have available, the consequence of error, like what happens if you make a mistake, and the degree of precision required in that estimation. So I'm just going to go through some calculation examples by level and estimation examples by level. So we'll look at calculation first. So at level 1 with calculation, a chip stand operator will use a cash register to receive payments and make change, and that's part of money math. At level 2, a restaurant hostess will prepare revenue counts, so summaries of the revenue and the average bill, and file them with a manager. So that's scheduling, budgeting, and accounting. At level 3, a maintenance personnel might calculate the area of walls, taking into account windows and doors to make sure they have the right amount of paint. So that's part of measurement and calculation. At level 4, a leasing agent might calculate sales and lease terms for a new vehicle by totaling the base price, the options, the taxes, and other fees. They then qualify the buyer, determine whether the buyer has credit, set payment terms, and schedule monthly plans. And that would be part of the money math area. At level 5, an investment analyst would look at past and present performance of stock to forecast future values. They might gather information on interest rates, politics, and the state of the economy. And that's that data analysis piece, but at level 5. So instead of going through each level for each type, it's just to give you a snapshot of calculation across the different levels, across those different categories of calculation. With estimation, again, remember, estimation only has 4 levels of complexity. Calculation has 5. So with estimation at level 1, a dry cleaner might estimate the weight of loads of garments by feel rather than actually weighing them. So they're estimating the weight. At level 2, a salon attendant might book appointments and they estimate the time available for each stylist, taking into account what services are going to be performed, whether it's, just a cut or is it a cut and a color. At level 3, a bus scheduler might estimate times for new bus routes when the rider demand is unknown. Inaccurate estimates might result in significant costs in time, money, and public relations, but can be quickly rectified by issuing new schedules. So again, what is what's going to happen if you make an error? That factors into the complexity as well. Like, how important is that? Level 4, a union business agent representing public sector workers responds to a unique request to estimate what union membership will be in 5 years, considering public policy trends and economic factors. So again, the complexity moves across that 4-level scale with estimation, depending on those factors that come into play. So that's numeracy. Honestly, it gives you a snapshot. Numeracy, you could probably spend hours and hours just understanding those scales and wrapping your mind around them. But again, this is just to give you kind of the basics of understanding those scales and how the complexity progresses. So that is numeracy, and we're going to move on to talk a little bit about oral communication now. So with oral communication, you're using speech to exchange thoughts and information. There are 4 levels of complexity based on 4 dimensions of oral communication. So you're looking at the range and complexity of communication functions. So why and how you're communicating. You're looking at how the range and complexity of the information about which one it communicates. You're also looking at to whom and in what circumstance one communicates. And finally, the risk in failing communication intent. So if the communication fails, how serious are the consequences to that? So those are the different kind of dimensions around. And again, it's on a 4-level scale. What's interesting to note is that, and I mentioned this earlier, when they were doing the essential skills research, they did look at the OALCF scale, but they also looked at the Canadian language benchmark scales, in particular with respect to speaking and listening. So if you are familiar with the Canadian language benchmark scales, when you look at the complexity in oral communication, level 1 listening and speaking roughly equates to benchmark 5 or 6. Level 2 speaking and listening equates roughly to benchmark 7 and 8. Level 3 listening and speaking equates to benchmark 9 and 10. And level 4 listening and speaking equates roughly to benchmark 11 and 12. If you read the literacy and basic skills guidelines, you'll note that it is suggested that for someone who English is not their first language, is going to access literacy and basic skills training, that they should have at least a benchmark 6 in speaking and listening in order to access literacy and basic skills training. And that makes sense when you look at the fact that level 1 in oral communication equates roughly to listening and speaking benchmark 5 or 6. Typical applications for oral communication include providing or obtaining information, greeting, reassuring or persuading people, resolving conflicts, leading or facilitating discussions. So in the world that you live in, you might use this skill to explain a food allergy to a server in a restaurant. An office clerk might take a message and share information by phone or in person. Retail salespeople greet clients and respond to questions about products. Dental assistants exchange ideas with patients about treatment plans. Correctional service officers might persuade inmates to enter a rehabilitation program. So again, there are hundreds of examples, workplace examples that you can access on the Employment and Social Development website. It's something that we obviously use every day. Again, 4-level scale in oral communication. So this just gives you a snapshot of different potential tasks that somebody would do at each level in a workplace. Cashiers might greet customers, tell them the total of their bill, and respond to questions. A host or a hostess might provide feedback to servers and resolve disagreements with clients, as well as participate in staff meetings to discuss issues or things that have gone on. At level 3, a debt collector might speak to somebody to explain how much money they owe and then determine a plan of action. The complexity could be augmented by the fact that somebody who is a debtor, they might be upset or hostile during this interaction. And at level 4, someone might negotiate or mediate to resolve a conflict or facilitate some agreement between individuals, groups, organizations, or countries. So again, that just kind of gives you a snapshot of the different levels of oral communication. Working with others, it's focused on interacting with others to complete a task. So it refers to both indirect and direct actions. So with direct actions, we're usually talking about face-to-face or voice interactions. Indirect or delayed interactions, email, memo, phone messages. In today's day, we do a lot of indirect or delayed interaction just because of the nature of having access to things like email, messaging systems, those types of tools that we have at our disposal now. So I think there's a heavy reliance on that type of interaction, but it's still part of that working with within the scope of working with others, because although it's delayed, you have to work with somebody, and that's how you're facilitating that process. With working with others, your typical applications are described in this way within the scale. So you could be working independently when you're working with others, but you're working alongside somebody. So there's other things that come into play. You might be working jointly with a partner or helper. You might work as part of a team, or you actually might be working in a role where you're supervising or leading people. And all of those are the typical applications for working with others. So in the community, you might use this skill when you're working with volunteers to organize a fundraising activity. It might be that you're part of the fundraising team. It might be that you're actually supervising a fundraising team, depending on your role. Municipal engineers might work with technicians, inspectors, and suppliers to complete a construction project. They're probably working more in a supervisory or leadership role. A home-based worker might research and provide website data to distant employers. A paramedic might work really closely with a partner to diagnose and treat a patient. Pipe fitters might coordinate work tasks and perform quality control with welders, pipe insulators, crane operators, and apprentices. All sorts of examples of where you work with others. So what's interesting about working with others is that there is no formal, there used to be, but there isn't anymore, a formal complexity scale. for this particular essential skill. So I'm going to describe the scale for you as it previously existed, but keep in mind that it is no longer part of essential skills research. Why I've left it in and I'm going to review it is because you can see, again, it is for you to be able to see the connection to the curriculum framework. You can see where this research was used to help build the framework. So it had 4 levels based on 2 dimensions: coordination, integration, requirements. So the degree to which the worker needed to align their work with and adapt to others in the workplace. And then the roles and responsibilities in working with others, the degree to which the worker was responsible for influencing or determining the actions of others in achieving organizational objectives. So again, the scale is not used now, but did inform the OALCF. So some examples across the levels that were previously used would include things like computer software engineers work alone in an office, contacting others as needed by phone or internet. So again, they're working alone, but they're working alongside others if they need to actually interact with them. At level 2, a financial analyst might work independently, but they communicate very regularly with clients. At level 3, research and development manager would work closely with lab assistants, production staff, and chief winemakers to ensure a consistent production process at a winemaking facility. They might also be supervising staff and coordinating with production to make sure that things happen when they're supposed to happen. At level 4, you might have a team approach to community policing with representatives from different local agencies and regularly scheduled meetings to ensure everybody's working together and has a unified approach. So that just gives you an idea of the scale as it existed and where, again, it did form part of the foundation as OALCF, or it did inform the OALCF to a certain degree. Okay, so before we kind of move on to thinking skills, I'm just going to run you through a little scenario around oral communication and working with others on the job. So I didn't make this scenario up. I actually took it from an essential skills video. There are videos available online with scripts. And I'm just going to run you through a script to explain how the essential skills can be used, or the lens of essential skills can be used to maybe identify where somebody has a skill gap as far as a part of their job. And again, I've put the link for the videos on the slide so that you can watch the video if you choose to. So in this case, this little case study, Raymond is a foreman for a busy construction company. To help offset his workload on one of the sites he's managing, he asked one of his senior members, Roger, to do some of his duties. So he delegates to Roger. He asks him to coordinate equipment being moved and staff being moved from one side of a work site to another. After a few hours, Raymond notices that nothing's happened and there's a lot of confusion with the workers. And many of them are actually coming to Raymond for help, even though he had given that task to Roger. And of course, because they're trying to coordinate heavy equipment being moved, safety is also becoming an issue. So he thinks to himself, why isn't Roger doing this? Did he not take the task seriously? Didn't he understand how important the safety was and that there was a deadline? But if you look at the situation through an essential skills lens, you can see that there might be more to what's going on here. So after talking with some of the crew, Raymond realizes that Roger has trouble giving direction and coordination to the team. Even though he's really organized, Roger, and he's good at his job individually, he found it hard to work with a group of people. So the kind of the happy ending to this case study is Raymond sees the value in his years of experience on work sites and saw the potential in him as crew leader. So he brings in an essential skills coach to help him out with those areas that they've identified as weaknesses. So I guess it's just the essential skills. One of the roles of the essential skills is to actually look at what is required to do certain jobs. And although somebody might have the education and appear to have the skills to do something, they might just be lacking a particular piece of the pie. And I think that's a lot of the time where we in LBS often kind of we sometimes fill those gaps, where if we can identify what piece of the pie or what skill gap there is, we can in many cases fill that gap or help somebody achieve that small chunk of skills that they need to be able to be successful on the job. So that's just a little case study. I've got the reference to these videos at the end because they're helpful. They're kind of interesting to watch and just to look at it through the lens of essential skills. Because if you can break the job down into those 9 essential skills, you can figure out if somebody's struggling, what pieces that they're actually struggling with. So moving on to thinking skills, again, thinking skills are hugely complex because there's 5 different components of thinking skills. So thinking is about finding and evaluating information to make decisions and organize work. And there's 5 different components. You have problem solving, decision making, critical thinking, job task planning and organizing, using your memory, significant use of memory, and finding information. So each component, except significant use of memory, also has its own 4-level rating scale with different dimensions. So math is really complex, but thinking is even more complex in that it's broken down even more, and it covers a lot. Your main applications are identifying and resolving problems, making decisions, finding information, planning and organizing job tasks, using critical thinking, and using memory. So again, those component areas are your typical applications. In the community, you might use your thinking skills to research and select courses at your local adult learning center. A paramedic might diagnose a patient's condition based on medical charts and their own observations. They use their judgment to start an appropriate treatment plan. So they use their thinking skills, but they're also using all sorts of other prior knowledge and information. So I'm going to quickly walk through each of these areas without reading all of it to you, because you're going to have this information and you can take a look at it a little more closely. With problem solving, you have 4 different levels, and within those 4 levels, you look at 4 different dimensions. So you're looking at the complexity of the problem, the complexity of identifying the problem, the complexity of identifying the steps to solving the problem, and then the complexity of assessing the solution. So there's examples here across the 5 levels of what you might do as far as problem solving at each level. And again, in the interest of time, I'm not going to read through each of the examples. I'll let you go back to that, but I wanted to include this information in the deck so that you had it to reflect on. With decision making, you have 4 different levels again, but across 6 different dimensions. So with decision making, the consequence of the error, the reversibility of the decision. So can it be reversed if you make that decision? The adequacy of the information available to help you make that decision. Whether there's a set procedure or a decision tree to follow. So is there a way to make that decision that you follow, or do you have to figure those steps out yourself? Whether there is a body of similar past decisions to compare to, so that prior knowledge around making a similar decision, and the extent to which judgment is required when you're making an appropriate decision. Again, across 4 levels, there's some examples from a farm laborer deciding what potato seedlings to keep and what to throw out, all the way to a nurse practitioner making an emergency patient health decision, maybe without the backup of a doctor, because that's the reality of our healthcare system right now. With critical thinking, you have 4 levels again, 4 levels of complexity across 3 different dimensions. So the dimensions are assessment criteria used, the process, and the effects of critical thinking. So when you're looking through the examples given at each level, those dimensions are built into the example. So the level, you have the 4 different levels, but within that, the description of what somebody has to do to employ that skill includes those different dimensions in that, all 3 of those different dimensions. With job task planning and organizing, 4 levels, many different dimensions. So the extent of the variety in work activities, whether the task sequence is provided to the worker or determined by the worker, whether priorities are provided or determined, the extent to which a day's work plan is disrupted, the extent to which the worker's own work plan must be integrated with the work plan of others, the number of sources for work assignments, and the extent to which the order of those tasks sequenced by the worker makes a difference to the total efficiency. When I read this one, I just laugh because my day is constantly getting disrupted, and I'm always trying to integrate my work plan with others. So I think this is something that we all deal with a lot on a regular basis. Again, your examples build those dimensions in. Might not be entirely clear. They might not be all applicable at every level of complexity, but the dimensions are meant to help you understand what you are specifically looking at within that task to help you make the decision as to what level that task would fall under. Okay. So, thinking skill, significant use of memory, and this is the one that differs in that it doesn't have any levels. It actually, instead, there are 3 different types of memory that are described. So you either have purposeful memorization of procedures, codes, parts, number, etc. So you're memorizing through repetition. The second kind is remembering information for a brief period, like minutes or hours. So it's that shorter term memory piece. And then unique events in learning, unique events in which learning occurs from one exposure. So these examples, I'm just going to go through them because they're it's interesting because we're not looking at levels, we're looking at types of memory. So at type 1, that memorization, luggage attendants must remember airport codes to sort luggage quickly and correctly. I always think we don't use memorization anymore, but there are many different occupations where it's still very much required to have that skill to memorize. To be able to work efficiently, you need to have that ability to memorize. We live in a world where you can look things up, but that's not the reality in many different occupations. It is in the world of education typically, but not all occupations. With type 2, remembering something for a short period of time. This is a great example. Waiters remember different lists of specials each day. They remember it for the day, then they forget it because there's a new list the next day. And then the third one is a unique event type of memory. So it's like a one-off, but it's so unique that you remember it. And the example they give is pharmacy assistants remember a customer's request for a potentially dangerous non-prescription drug when the customer makes a follow-up inquiry. So that, it's a drug that maybe somebody wants to take, but it could be counterintuitive to something else they're taking, and the pharmacy remembers that when they come back and ask for that drug again. Okay, for thinking skills, last but not least, there's finding information, and we're back to having a 4-level complexity scale with 2 different dimensions, the complexity of locating the information and then the complexity of extracting and processing the information. And again, I won't go through these specific examples, but the complexity as you go through the levels, the complexity increases, and both of those dimensions are typically reflected across the 4 levels. So that's thinking skills in a nutshell, and it's kind of a very quick and dirty on thinking skills because there's a lot of content there. Computer use, digital technology is using computers and other forms of technology. And again, this one's rated on a 5-level scale of complexity. So applications, you're using different types of technology, using word processing software, emails, spreadsheets, internet. Those are typical applications. Community, you still might need these skills when you're using an ATM. They are becoming more and more intuitive, but you still do have to know how to operate them. In the workplace, a telephone operator would use customized software to scan databases. So computer use is a huge part of our lives. There are the 5 levels of complexity, and I'm just going to actually go through the first 3 because, again, remember OALCF equates with the first 3 levels, and I think one of the big challenges we find with OALCF is digital technology doesn't have a lot of, I would say, meat in the actual curriculum framework. It's an incredibly hard area to describe without being specific in terms of actual software and particular software, because it varies. So being wide enough and vague enough to describe levels without being too specific is very challenging, and you can see that as well within the essential skills. So at level 1, you're performing tasks which require only basic interaction with a computer, few basic commands, and you don't really need to know how to use any type of software. At level 2, you're performing tasks that require the use of several familiar software functions, and then at level 3, you're using multiple operations and a wide range of software features or options. You'll see that language very much is reflected or similar to what you see in the 3 levels of the OALCF. Examples across levels range at level 1 from bus ticket agents responding to instructions on a computer screen and pressing a button to print a ticket, all the way up to level 5, where you see system analysts design new payroll systems after consulting with companies, human resource departments, and customers of the system. So it's again a wide range. We tend, or our framework in LBS goes up to the end of level 3, or is similar to the end of essential skills level 3. With digital technology, again, this is a little case study, and I am going to share it because it's something that I think happens more and more today. Again, there's a video if you want to watch the video afterwards, but I'll just kind of run you through this scenario. So Jan has worked in a warehouse for many years and was promoted to a supervisor. And part of her new duties include using an online system for reporting and scheduling. So she's been doing this using paper previous to this. The HR manager has noticed that her reports are late and often incomplete. She'd been shown how to do it when she first received her promotion. So the question is, what's the problem? Is it too much work? Did she not want to be able to do those new responsibilities? But again, looking at it through the perspective of the lens of essential skills, perhaps it's more that she didn't have the computer skills she needs to be able to do the task. She might have been having trouble with basics such as entering information in a template and saving her work to a folder. And if she didn't tell anybody she was struggling, it made it look like she was incompetent. So again, the happy ending to this story is that the HR manager realizes that it's about the computer use skills as opposed to somebody not wanting to do their job, and arranges for some targeted training for this particular employee. I like this example because it's actually happened to me in my program before, where I've had, and this doesn't happen often, but I've had a company call and say, we have an employee, we have a new system, with some new paperwork and they're really struggling. Is this something that you can help this person with? And we've done some very targeted training with real work documents to be able to get a person to be able to do their new job duties based on something that has changed within a work environment. So that's digital technology. And I believe the last one we're talking about is continuous learning. So continuous learning is participating in the ongoing process of improving your skills and knowledge. Continuous learning there's the scale. Again, with this one, it's not used anymore in essential skills, but I've shared the previous iteration of it just so that you have the background, because this particular scale also did inform the OALCF. So you have 4 levels based on 3 dimensions, reflecting 3 different phases of the continuous learning process. So the responsibility for setting and achieving learning goals, complexity of the learning process, and the extent of interference needed to apply learning to the job. Applications are learning on the job, learning through formal training, learning through self-study, know how to learn, understand your learning style, know where to find resources, and know how to gain access to opportunities. So retail sales associates might read a product brochure to continuously learn or attend some type of training. You might, in your community, go to a first aid course to continuously learn how to do something and add a new skill. By example, across the level, so again, the scale is no longer used, but when the OALCF was being researched and developed, the scale was still available, and it did inform that. So at level 1, a dishwasher is familiarized with new equipment and cleaning procedures by a supervisor. So that's an example of level 1 continuous learning. Whereas at level 3, an audiologist might schedule and participate in a workshop, a conference, or read a trade journal to keep a provincial license. So again, the continuous learning is a 4-level, or was previously a 4-level scale. Okay, so we've now kind of walked through all 9 of the essential skills, and I've tried to give you a very quick and dirty overview of the complexity scales within each of those 9 essential skills, just to give you kind of the background and understanding of the 9 essential skills, and also give you a sense of how that informed the OALCF. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the OALCF now in general. And again, if you are not new to LBS, this is not going to be probably new to you. It's more of a refresher, but I just want to make sure that we solidify the connection. So OALCF and essential skills, OALCF skills are organized into competencies, and essential skills are organized by skill domain. So that's a difference between the 2 different scales. The OALCF focuses on how learners use skills outside of a literacy program. It's competency-based, but it's also task-based. So what we're looking at is ensuring that the programming that is delivered is very task-based. People are trying to do things that are as close to what they're going to be doing outside a literacy program as possible. As is possible. It's never 100%, but that is the intent behind the OALCF. With the OALCF and essential skills, the levels generally equate. So the 3 levels of OALCF generally equate to the first 3 levels of essential skills. And again, remember, the levels in both essential skills and in the OALCF are meant to relate to the task that's being performed, not the learner. The learner isn't a level, it's the task the learner is doing. And a learner might be very good at doing OALCF level 3 tasks in a particular competency, but they have a gap and struggle with OALCF level 2 tasks in another competency. Just like with essential skills, a worker might have great essential skills in 2 or 3 areas and might just have a gap in a particular area, like the example we just talked about, where the worker had a digital skill gap, but was quite competent in doing all of her other work. And that's why she got a promotion. So with the 3 levels of proficiency in OALCF, they're informed by the factors that drive complexity at essential skills levels 1, 2, and 3, which I tried to illustrate as we talked about the complexity levels in essential skills. It goes beyond the levels in that the primary purpose is to support adult learning. So it's not focused on just workplace. The scales weren't just lifted and dropped into OALCF. They definitely informed the levels, but the OALCF is supplemented with task and performance descriptors that incorporate ES complexity, but also describe more than just that. So the key elements of the curriculum framework are the competencies, the task groups, the indicators, the descriptors, and then the task examples. The task groups organize the content from within a competency. They were developed from lists of common tasks collected from the field, which were then sorted into meaningful categories. So the question to the field was, what do people need to be able to do? And that was collected, and then a sorting process took place. And the competencies came out of that process. The indicator is meant to describe the achievement at the end of the level and prevent a snapshot of the programming focus for that level. So that's really important. The levels in the OALCF are the end point. So they don't necessarily describe the full range. They're describing, the indicators are describing the end point of level 1, level 2, level 3. The descriptors, both performance descriptors and task descriptors, detail the qualities of learner performance and tasks at a given level. They're intended to help a practitioner understand task complexity. Task descriptors describe features of the task at a given level. Performance descriptors are the expected features of a learner's performance at a given level. And that's where it differs a little bit, is more in those performance descriptors. The interpretation of task complexity in the domains covered by ES is very strict and draws heavily on information processing skills to define complexity. The curriculum framework was supplemented with task and performance descriptors beyond those captured by ES complexity because more detail was needed to reflect and support instruction in different learning contexts, including instruction for learners that have primarily academic goals. So those academic goal paths of secondary, school credit, and post-secondary. So when you take a look at the 6 competencies and the 9 skill domains, you can definitely see where they cross over. So with find and use information, it includes reading, document use, and thinking skills. And just to break it down a little further, if you look at find and use information, you follow the arrow across and you look at the 3 different task groups, you can see how the different essential skills break down as well within each of those task groups. So for reading continuous text, very close to reading. Interpreting documents, it involves document use and thinking. It can also involve reading if there's more than a paragraph of text. And then extracting information from presentations, broadcasts, etc., can involve reading, document use, and thinking. So you can see how that breaks down, but also how it kind of supports or relates back. With communicating ideas and information, it involves writing, oral communication, document use, and thinking skills. You'll notice that thinking skills are interspersed or associated with each competency because they weren't put in as a separate competency. They were integrated within each of those 6 competencies. or implicit within each of those 6 competencies. Understand and use numbers, very strong correlation to numeracy, and of course thinking skills built in. Use digital technology, again a strong correlation to computer use or digital skills. With managed learning, the competency managed learning, you can see that it built heavily on the concept of continuous learning. Again, the continuous learning scale is no longer used in essential skills, and the managed learning scale is pretty broad and bare boned, and that's because it was incredibly difficult to be able to level that particular competency. Engage with others, very connected to working with others, and oral communication, as well as thinking skills. So your competencies are organized by task groups. So tasks are really the key in the OALCF. Tasks are also very important in essential skills, because essentially what you're doing is rating the complexity of the task. A task is something that an individual is likely to do outside of a learning environment. So something you're likely to do at home, at work, or in the community. A lot like an essential skill has applicability both at home, but also when you're learning and in life, at home and in the community. The idea behind a task is that it can be understood in real life terms, and the framework is meant to be used so that you can level a task or assess a task. So the idea with the framework is that you can use the framework to identify the complexity of tasks that learners are expected to do, and identify tasks that are at an appropriate level of difficulty for a learner. And again, if you work in LBS, I'm sure none of this is new to you. So it's really just a refresher. But a lot of this information in this presentation was pulled from some of the original training that was done when the OALCF was rolled out across the province. So last slide on tasks and the OALCF. Is it a task? So these are the questions you can ask yourself. What is the learner asked to do? Is it something that they would do outside of the program? What is the purpose of the activity? Why are they doing it? So it's not just about doing something, but why are you doing it? And is it authentic? Again, is it something they do outside of the agency? So I actually used to have this posted on my wall when I was developing materials, just to reflect on these questions. Like, I always think through that when we're developing new materials or putting together work for learners to do, just to make sure that I'm grounded in the fact that we're supposed to be delivering a task-based program. So that is a very, very quick overview of the OALCF, and just an attempt to show how it's linked, or the research around the OALCF and the development of it was very much tied to the 9 essential skills and the essential skills research project, and the complexity levels that were developed through that work, which is still used today. So what I'm going to do for the bulk of, or the remainder of the webinar, is I'm just going to walk you through some resources that are out there that can help you if you're looking for more information or support on the 9 essential skills, and also the background information on the OALCF, as well as just some places where you can actually and curriculum development in the next 2 webinars. So in those webinars, we'll also be looking at additional resources, but this is just, it's almost like a little bit of background reading, or just a reminder of some of the things that are out there for you. Okay, so first and foremost, the Reader's Guide to Essential Skills. So this is accessible online, and I've put links in for all of this information so that you can access it. The reader's guide, almost all of the information around essential skills that I delivered today in this webinar is pulled from the reader's guide. It's online. It's kind of, they keep changing it. They've changed it many times over the years, how you access it. But what I tried to do is break it down into essential skill chunks so that it gave you a very good sense of the information that's in there. When you go in, the other part of that are the essential skills profiles, where you can actually look at real jobs and then get a sense of the essential skills and the levels that are associated with particular occupations. But the guide itself is the background and the explanation around complexity and some of the examples that I've provided for you today. There are some videos available online around essential skills that are on the Employment and Social Development website. And they give you an overview of many different things. So I think there's 5 or 6 videos that are accessible right now. So that's a great place to go if you want a little bit more basic information delivered video style. Also, the 2 examples, the 2 case studies that I walked through today, both came from the essential skills videos. There are videos associated with both of those examples. So that is another first like primary source of information that you can go to, because again, this is the government, official government sites. So it's your primary source of information for all things essential skills. There's the literacy and essential skills section of the social development, employment and social development site as well. And what's great about this is that there are a number of tools that you can access around literacy and essential skills. So you can access online indicators and checklists, self-assessments, tip sheets. This is where you can access the profiles, and there's also essential skills for 15 different trades. In addition, there's something called Making the Tools Work for You. So this is a guide for using the essential skills tools and resources that they've made available through their site. We'll talk about some of the assessments and that in the next in the assessment webinar, but this is a great place to go to pull information, or if you're looking for quick and dirty assessments to integrate into programming, because you can make the connection between essential skills and OALCF quite easily, hopefully. It's a great place to access some of that, some of those tools and checklists, especially if someone is on the employment goal path, although there is applicability across other goal paths. So that is, again, a primary source of information that you can go to if you're looking for more background and tools and tips around essential skills. Essential Skills for Literacy Practitioners, a guide and 3 workshops, is a set of resources that was developed by one of the regional networks, Literacy Link South Central, and I've given you a link there. And essentially that is what it is. It is a guide and 3 workshops around essential skills. A lot of the information I shared with you today, you'll find that information just delivered in a little different way within that resource. That resource was developed almost at rate as the OALCF was going to be rolled out. The people who worked on that actually also worked on the OALCF. It was meant to just explain essential skills and their role in literacy and how you can use the essential skills in a literacy program. And it also makes the connection to the OALCF. So that's a secondary, I would call that a secondary source of information, because it was developed by a contracted party, but still good information and just a little different way to get that information. From the perspective of knowing and understanding how OALCF was developed, there are a number of foundational documents buried deep on the EOPG if you really look for them. If you're you've been around since OALCF rolled out, you may have read these. If you are newer to the program, then you might not have ever encountered or read any of these foundational documents. I just wanted to point out that they are there and they are available. So the curriculum framework itself is one of the foundational documents, but there's something called the conceptual foundation, which explains how the framework was developed and some of the sources of information that were drawn upon in order to develop that document. As well, foundations of transition-oriented programming, foundations of assessment and foundations of learning materials are also background documentation that was developed by the ministry to support the rollout of OALCF. These would be primary sources because they were actually developed by the government to support the OALCF. So that's just an FYI for people who may or may not have been aware that those were actually available. Some other places to find resources that I just wanted to point out include the task-based activities for LBS. So this is a portal that was developed by Quill Learning Network, and it's a collection of task-based activities that are based on the curriculum framework, which has its roots in essential skills. And it's a great place to go for materials. When I'm putting together new programming or developing some new curriculum, I will often go here and see what's available because sometimes it can save you a lot of work. The materials have been vetted and are supported by the OALCF. A newer place to find resources is the Literacy Resources and Discussion Forum. So two of the support organizations, Community Literacy of Ontario and Labec Literacy of Ontario, put together a discussion forum a couple years ago, and there's not been a ton of uptake on that. It's weird because people said they wanted a place to discuss, but I think they're just afraid to do that. So as a secondary component to that, those organizations have been collecting resources and putting them in a searchable database on that site. And it's like an annotated set of resources. So where possible, the resource is actually loaded onto the site, and where not possible, a link to that resource is available. And it tells you whether or not it relates to essential skills in OALCF or is correlated to that. The idea behind this is that there are so many resources out there, but they are all over the place. And our previous go-to, the National Adult Literacy Database, no longer exists or is funded, was actually a national organization, but all of our resources were housed there. And while you can still find them sometimes, there isn't a kind of a go-to in Ontario for that stuff. So we're building, those organizations are building up this database of resources right now. So it's a good place to go to if you're looking for things that, and it tells you whether or not they're based on or related to OALCF and essential skills. The Learning Networks of Ontario, which is all 16 regional networks across the province, also have some resources captured on their website. So I've given you a link to that. There's a section called instructional resources. So that's another place to go for resources right now that hopefully support or are related to the OALCF and or integrate essential skills. So those are just a few things, resources that I wanted to either share with you or remind you of, because I think in our day-to-day work, we tend to forget there's things out there because we get so mired down in reporting and making sure our data is good and our stats are good and the day-to-day issues that we deal with, that we forget that there's a lot of stuff out there and how we can find it quickly. For this particular webinar, I just wanted to kind of go over the main sources of information that were used to put it together. So the original OALCF training packages were used. The Reader's Guide to the Essential Skills Profiles was used heavily. Essential Skills for Literacy Practitioners, that was one of the resources I referred to, was used. the conceptual foundation and the framework itself were used, as well as the ESDC Literacy and Essential Skills website. I always want to say HRSDC because it was that for so many years, but that ministry is different. And then a significant amount of research and work in progress by the network itself for the 3 webinars was shared with me. So they've been doing a lot of research and collection and taking courses. So all of that was shared with me in order to be able to try to synthesize the information into the webinars to share with you. So just so you're aware, and if you're looking for anything, all of this information pretty much is available publicly. So that's all that I have to talk about today. I've covered now the essential skills. We've talked a lot about complexity. We've touched on OALCF and the connection, and then I've tried to just give you a few resources, mostly primary resources that you can go to if you want more information or you want to supplement your information. So at this point, I'm happy to take questions if anybody has any.
We do have one that was posted in the question section actually a few minutes ago.
Okay, let me see. Is it in? I don't know if I can see that. So just let me. I don't see it in chat. I don't have access to questions.
No? Okay,
at
let
my
me
end.
read it to you. So it's, do you know of examples where Ontario Works or an EO service provider have partnered with an LBS provider to provide group pre-employment training, specifically in the area of engage with others? What I'll do is I'll copy and paste it into the chat for you as well, so you can take a look.
Okay, that's good. Let me. I need to think about that. Specific examples. Ontario Works or EOS. So I would say one of the things that's being used quite widely across the province is soft skills solutions. If you're familiar with that, it was developed by one of the training boards. You have to actually take the training. It's a train the trainer to be able to deliver that. And I know of more than one place that partners with LBS, in particular employment service providers, to deliver soft skills solutions to which I would say really incorporates that engage with others competency because of the nature of the training that's delivered. There's a lot of engage with others built into it. And I've seen that, or I know of that being used with groups of workers, such as in particular, those going through the YJC program. So where a group that's slated to go through YJC might do soft skills solutions with an LBS partner initially to supplement what's being delivered through the YJC. Well, I also have seen that just in general with groups of coming into employment services that they might not all be going on to the same particular employment training area, but they're all pre-employment getting ready to try to access service, and they're sent to soft skills solutions to try to build up some of those skills. I hope that answered that question. I didn't give you specific examples, but I know in the area I work in, this happens all the time. Does anybody have any other questions they want to ask? If you put them in the chat, if you don't want to put your hand up and ask, I can answer them from the chat as well, because I can see that. I always hate afternoon webinars because I think people are so tired by this time of the day that they just can't mentally process information anymore.
That being said, I do want to remind everybody that the handout is available. The presentation is available under handouts. So you should see that on your control panel. If you have any questions about that, let me know. Also, for those who weren't here at the beginning, if those who want the French version, if you could put your hand up, I will write your name down and email that as soon as it's available.
Okay, so I'm going to say it is, well, we have 7 minutes left, but I'm gonna, at this point, if there
We,
aren't any other questions,
we
sorry,
do
go
have
ahead.
a few questions coming up right
Okay,
now.
no problem, sorry. Okay,
All
that's
good,
good.
just as you said that. Okay, so
Yeah,
let me
no,
just go get them for you here.
yeah, no problem.
All right. Can you point me in the direction of where to pursue soft skills solution train the trainer training?
You know what? I will send that information. I can't off the top of my head remember which training board does it. I'll send that information in, and I'll get them to send it out to you from the net. We'll just maybe do like an email out for something like that to everybody.
Perfect. So next question is, oh, I think it's just a comment that connect to skills is another.
Yep, that's a good example.
So
Thank
I'll
you.
put that into the chat as well. And then how do I access the handout? Oh, okay, so on the control panel, there should be a section that says handouts 1 of 5. And you should be able to just click on the title and that will download it. I believe Robyn did try downloading on her end, so if that is different, please let me know. I'm not sure if you guys see it a little bit differently than I do.
Just with, I'm just going to comment on Connect to Skills. Connect to Skills is programming that's being funded through the ministry to different types of organizations across the province. And it's very specific skills training for a particular industry, typically, not always, but typically. So for example, there's one that prepares people to go and work in, for example, a packaging logistics type of environment. I'll just use that as an example. And I have seen in some of those cases, I know of a particular example where a literacy and basic skills agency is actually going in and delivering a portion of the training. In this case, I believe they're delivering it as fee for service. And I think they're delivering something around budgeting and time management. So that's Connect to Skills has a training component, so the organization delivering it would typically deliver the training, but they can bring other people in. But I don't typically believe that they would be a distinct LBS client as well.
So Lynn, I see you're having a hard time with the file. I'm not sure what kind of computer you're using, but it might just be downloading to a folder kind of in the background. Robyn, do you know where it sent it when you clicked on it?
On my computer, it's going to be different. It's a big file. It's like 1.5 megabytes. So the other thing we could do is PDF it. Is it PDF? No, it's a PowerPoint that you've uploaded. Maybe if it gets PDF'd, it could be just sent out afterwards. Is that hard to do, or I don't know?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay.
I mean, we have a few minutes left. I'll see if I can get it done quickly. Otherwise, I will email it.
Yeah. It's such a big file. That might be the problem as well.
Yeah. Let me see what I can do quickly here.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? I don't see anything in the chat box, so.
Let me just take a quick look. Okay, if anybody right now is having a hard time with the attachment, do you want to just put your hand up and I will make sure to email you a copy.
Okay, great. So if we don't have any more questions, I'm going to wrap it up for today because it is just about 3 o'clock. What I will say is that if you think of a question afterwards, a burning question that you'd really like to ask me, just send it to the network and I'm happy to. If you know how to get a hold of me, you can also do that. But you can definitely send a question to the network and I'll be happy to answer anything after the fact. So I just want to thank everybody for participating today. It's pretty heavy material, so not the most exciting material to deal with, but hopefully if you are already familiar with it, it was a good refresher, and if it's new to you, hopefully it gave you a good foundation in understanding both the 9 essential skills and then the complexity scales and the connection to OALCF.
Great. Well, thank you, Robyn. I will make sure to send out the attachment to those who could not get it, and it may take a little while to get the French one. We are still waiting for it to be translated. So once that's ready, we will send it out for you.
Okay, thank you. Have a good afternoon, everybody.